Hello everyone, in this video we'll discuss what is seasoning of timbering and is really necessary for seasoning the timber and some of the objects and also a method of seasoning the timber. Generally, a fresh cut timber will be too wet for normal use and it is very unsuitable for various that is engineering purposes. So seasoning is the process of reducing the moisture content, that means drying the timber in order to prevent the timber from the fermentation, maybe a decay, and making it suitable for the use. So some of the objects of seasoning the wood are as follows. It will reduce the shrinkage, wrapping, and also increases the strength, durability, and also workability, and reduces its tendency to split and make suitable for painting. And finally, it will also reduce its weight. And some of the methods are there for seasoning, maybe a natural seasoning or artificial seasoning, and these objects and methods will discuss in coming slides.
Okay, just now I told what is seasoning of timber. Generally, the timber contains 50% water of its own dry weight of water. Okay, it has to be removed before using for various engineering purposes. Okay, uh, so the definition is the process of drying the timber is known as seasoning of timber. Okay, and the moisture content should be removed under controlled condition at uniform rate from all parts of the timber. Okay, it has to be removed. Generally, the timber is a very slow process, and the removing of water is to be very uniformly at a very slow rate. Okay, and it has to be protected from the rain and humidity because to avoid additional water to the timber, it may contain a fungi and insects. To avoid this, it has to be protected from rain and humidity. So in this slide, the continuation of seasoning of timber. If the drying is irregular, the shrinkage of timber will also be irregular. Okay. So as I told in earlier slide, the drying process should be uniformly, and generally it's a very slow rate. It should be uniformly. It should be seasoned at very slow rate. If it is drying process is irregular, the shrinkage will also be irregular, and generally it will set up the internal stresses between the fibers in the timber. Okay. So some of the objects are there for why the seasoning has to be done. We'll discuss what are the objects of seasoning. Generally, the seasoning is done to give hardness, strength, stiffness, and also it will resist the electrical resistance to timber. So it will maintain the shape, size of the timber which remain unchanged. Okay, after seasoning it, generally it will decrease weight of the timber also, and thereby it will reduce the cost of the transportation. It gives easy workable and facilitate operation during a conversions, and it also gives the timber for treatment of paints, varnishes and preservatives, etc. Okay, if it is seasoned, that means if it is totally dried, it will be safe from the fungi and insects to reduce the tendency of the timber to crack, shrink, and wrap. So these are the objects why the seasoning has to be done. So coming to next slide, we'll discuss the method of seasoning. There are two methods of seasoning. One is obviously a natural seasoning, and one is a artificial seasoning, which gives a very bit fast process than natural seasoning. We'll discuss the natural seasoning in the next slide. So first is natural seasoning. When seasoning is carried out by natural air, is called natural seasoning, or simply is called air seasoning. Okay, seasoning by natural air is called a natural seasoning or a air seasoning. So, how the procedure is adopted by natural seasoning? So, I'll explain how the procedure for natural seasoning in this slide. Okay, generally a woodlock is sawn into convenient sizes, and after sawing it, I mean sawing means after cutting it in a convenient desired shapes and sizes, it is stacked means kept stacked under a covered shed. Okay, under this, let consider this as a shed. It is kept under the covered shed. Okay, it is covered only at the top. Okay, remaining on all four sides it's not covered, because a natural air has to be come through inside. So the timber is kept. Okay, so the timber is kept in crosswise direction. Okay, in this figure it is not a crosswise, it is kept in the each layer of timber. You can see here each layer of timber is kept in the same direction of a gap of 30 to 40 mm here of a gap. Generally of each layer it has kept a crosswise direction, one in this direction and other opposite of the respective layers. Okay, why it is kept alternate? So it will permit the free circulation of air. That's the reason the timber are kept in clockwise direction. Okay, in duration of drying, it will depends upon the type of wood and size of drying. Okay, maybe the rate of drying is obviously is slow, and in this seasoning, that is in air seasoning, that is natural seasoning, the moisture content of the wood reduces to 12 to 15%. So I'll explain once again. The woodlock is cut into convenient sizes and kept under a covered shed in crosswise direction in alternate layers. You can see exact figure in the notes. So as to permit free circulation of air. Number one. Number two, the duration of drying depends upon the type of wood and the size of wood. Number three, the rate of drying is very slow. And next, it reduces the moisture content of wood to 12 to 15%. So this is the procedure of seasoning naturally. Okay. Oh, so what are the advantages of natural seasoning? Is there any advantages of seasoning naturally, or is there any disadvantages of seasoning naturally? Obviously, there will be advantage also and there will be disadvantage also. Okay, advantages in the first point. Just now I told you it removes 12 to 15%. 12 to 15%. Okay, it's 10 to 20%. It doesn't matter. The moisture content of food can be brought down to about 10 to 20%. And generally, in natural seasoning, it does not require a skilled supervision. It's very simple process of seasoning naturally. And next advantages for thicker section. If the wood is very thick and it is done by artificial seasoning, I have not explained what is artificial seasoning. There are two, just now I told you in previous slides, there are two types, methods of, there are two methods of seasoning. First one is natural seasoning and second one is artificial seasoning. I have explained only the natural seasoning. Okay, next we'll move on to the artificial seasoning. Okay, for the thicker section of timber done by artificial seasoning is very uneconomical. It requires most cost. So for thicker section, the natural seasoning can be adopted to avoid cost. It's very economical by seasoning naturally. That's what generally the natural seasoning is simple and very cheap. So these are some advantages we got in natural seasoning. So some disadvantage also will be there in natural seasoning. First, less control over air. What is it is? What does it mean? Less control over air. Yes, the circulation of air will not may not be uniform and it will not move the entire the covered portion under the shade of the timber. So less air may be circulated all over the timber. So less control over the air. And second, the drying of different surfaces may not be uniform. Yes, just I told you, the surfaces may not get the air properly. So during the drying process, the surfaces of timber, respective timber, may not be uniform. Okay, and chance of getting fungi and insects. Okay, chance of attack by fungi and insects during seasoning. This reason is due to, if the circulation is not proper, the circulation of air, some timber will not get proper circulation of air and it will not be seasoned naturally. For that particular uh, timber may attack insects and it causes a fungi. So that's are the disadvantages in natural seasoning. In artificial seasoning, this will not be the disadvantages. Okay, we'll move on to artificial seasoning. That is the second method of seasoning after natural seasoning. The second is a artificial seasoning. The first point, to make the dry more uniform and even by control artificial seasoning is adopted. Yes, compared to the natural seasoning, the artificial seasoning gives more uniform and even. So in this seasoning, drying process is uniform to all the timber as compared to natural seasoning, and generally it reduces the time also. As I told earlier, a natural seasoning is very slow process than artificial seasoning. So it will reduce the time for seasoning, because there are four methods are there in artificial seasoning. I'll explain in the coming slides. Obviously, shrinkage, cracking, warping are minimized in this type of seasoning. The wood with desired moisture content may be obtained by artificial. Yes, this is obvious. The moisture content may be obtained by the artificial seasoning. So there are various methods in artificial seasoning. The first method is the water seasoning, a boiling method, electric seasoning, and kiln seasoning. So these are very fast process than natural seasoning. So first, in artificial seasoning, we'll discuss water seasoning. Water seasoning. In this method, to remove a sap wood, the logs of wood, so the timber is immersed in water, preferably in running water of stream, for 2 to 4 weeks. After that, it is taken out from the water and it is dried under open air. So in this, water seasoning, wrapping and cracking can be avoided, and generally it will become a brittle, and also it reduces the strength. I repeat, the process of water seasoning, the logs of wood are kept completely immersed in running stream of water. Consequently, the sap, the sugar, and the gum are leached out and are replaced by water after keeping in immersed stream of water for 2 to 4 weeks. The logs are then kept out in a air to dry. After taking out from the water, it is kept to dry under the air. So it is a very quick process, but the disadvantages is all the elastic properties, that is strength of the wood, will be reduced. So after water seasoning, the next method is a boiling. Boiling, it is boiled in water for 3 to 4 hours, then it is taken out and dried, and slowly it is dried. Even though the period of seasoning is less, as I told earlier, in artificial method, the seasoning will be very less than natural seasoning. But in boiling method of seasoning, it is very expensive method. In water, or exposing the wood to the action of steam spray is a very quick but expensive process of seasoning. Next, we'll move to third method, electric seasoning. After this, one more method is there in artificial seasoning. It is a kiln seasoning. Before that, we'll discuss the electric seasoning. Generally, this seasoning is done by passing high frequency AC current through the timber, and then the timber gets heated and dried out. Yes, here it's a uniform seasoning of wood. As I told, I repeatedly telling that in artificial method it will be uniformly seasoning, but in this electric seasoning the capital cost of equipments is very more is more. Obviously, this is a very rapid method. This method is used in the manufacture of plywood. Okay, I repeat how the electric seasoning is done. So the logs are placed in such a way that their two ends touch the electrodes. Then the current is passed through the setup. So as being a bad conductor, the wood resists the flow of current, generating heat in the process, which results in its drying. The major disadvantages or the drawbacks in this method of electrical seasoning is the wood may split during the process. Okay, next chemical seasoning. The chemical seasoning is also called a salt seasoning. In this method, the timber is soaked in saturated solution of suitable salt and then removed and then seasoned. So the interior moisture is drawn out by the saturated salt solution and the interior part dries before the outer part. So here it is less chance of external cracks. Okay, I'll explain in other way. Generally, an aqueous solution of certain chemicals have lower vapor pressures than that of pure water. If the outer layers of timber are treated with such chemicals, the vapor pressure will reduce and vapor pressure gradient will set up. Okay, so the interior of timber containing no salts retain its original vapor pressure and therefore it will tend to dry rapidly. That's it. Okay, next, in the last method of artificial seasoning, that is the kin seasoning. Okay, here you can see the arrangement of kin seasoning. In this method, the timber is carried out inside and an airtight chamber. You can see in this figure. Okay, I'll explain the process of the kin seasoning. So the timber is arranged inside this chamber. Obviously, the spaces are left out for free circulation of air, and the humid and heated air temperature nearly about 35 degree to 38 degree Celsius is then forced inside the chamber in the suitable arrangement. Okay, I repeat, the heated air of temperature of 35 to 38 degrees then is forced inside the chamber in an arrangement. So it is allowed to circulate around the timber pieces, and then the evaporation from the surface of timber pieces is prevented because of air, because of high humidity of air. Then the heat gradually reaches inside the timber pieces. The relative humidity will now gradually will be reduced. The temperature is then increased and maintained till the desired degree of moisture content. So here I've explained it is arranged and these spaces are kept for air circulation in green seasoning, and the heat at air temperature of 35 to 38 degrees Celsius is then forced into the chamber in an arrangement. It is allowed to circulate around the timber pieces. Yes, and evaporation from the surface of timber pieces is prevented because of high humidity of air. And then the heat gradually reaches inside the timber pieces. The relative humidity after that is now gradually will be reduced. So the relative humidity will gradually reduce. So finally the temperature is then increased and maintained till the desired degree of moisture content is obtained. Okay, so here depending upon the mode of construction and the operation of kilns, there are two types. One is stationary kilns and next is progressive kilns. So in this process, some of the advantages are there. It may be a overall advantages of seasoning. So handling and transportation cost of food can be reduced. So in this process, seasoned timber show resistance, good resistance to decay. The timber should be seasoned before the application of, yes, any application of paints or varnish or preservative, the timber has to be seasoned before applying these type of paints or varnishes or any preservatives, and it will give easy workability. Next, dimension stability of furnished products can be maintained obviously after seasoning. So improved engineering properties of food. Yes, finally the advantages gives the proper engineering properties of food. So thank you very much.